Good afternoon, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm really excited to be joined today by three incredible authors and one of our wonderful community partners. And I'm going to start by welcoming our community partner first. So Aparna is here from Raksha, and Raksha is a Georgia-based nonprofit with a mission to promote a stronger and healthier South Asian community through confidential support services, education, and advocacy. Raksha works toward healing, empowerment, and justice for survivors of violence. And Raksha's been a partner of Karis for, I think, well over 20 years at this point, if not even longer. You know, time starts to compress, but we're very honored to have Raksha's partnership on this event. And this event was brought to us as the brainchild of Kieran and Veena and Farzana. And I'm going to introduce Kieran first. Kiran Bhat is a global citizen formed in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, to parents from Southern Karnataka in India. Thank you. He has currently traveled to over 130 countries, lived in 18 different places, and speaks 12 languages. He is primarily known as the author of We of the Forsaken World, but he has authored books in 4 foreign languages and has had his writing published in the Kenyon Review, the Brooklyn Rail, the Colorado Review, Eclectica, 3 a.m. Magazine, the Radical Art Review, Cha, the Chakkar, Mascara Literary Review, and several other places. His list of homes is vast, but his heart and spirit always remains in Mumbai somehow. He currently lives in Melbourne, and you can find him at Weltgeist Kieran. So welcome, Kieran. We're very glad to have you here. And next, just in a going clockwise on my screen, which may or may not be clockwise on your screen, I want to welcome Vina Rao. Veena was born and raised in India, but calls Atlanta home. A journalist by profession, she is the founding editor and publisher of NRI Pulse, a popular Indian American newspaper. Purple Lotus, her debut novel, is the winner of the She Writes Press and Spark Press Toward Equality in Publishing STEP contest. And you can find her at venaspulse.com. So welcome, Veena. And finally, I want to welcome Farzana Doctor. Farzana is the Toronto-based author of 4 novels, Stealing Nazreen, 6 Meters of Pavement, All Inclusive, and 7-7. 7-7 has been chosen for the 2020 Best Book lists, including Indigo Chapters, Apple Books, Amnesty International, CBC Books, and more. 7 is the first novel to focus on the practice of FGM and the Dawoodi Bohra community. Farzana is also the Masai behind Dear Masai and Masi, thank you, a new sex and relationship column for FGM-C survivors. She is also an activist, part-time psychotherapist, and amateur tarot card reader. You can find her at farzanadoctor.com. So welcome to you all, and I'm going to turn this over to Aparna to give a further warm welcome.
Thank you all. As always, it's exciting to be here and partner with my favorite bookstore, the place where everybody knows my name and always has books ready for me to purchase and give to my friends and to, of course, read. And of course, I love having South Asian authors because I feel like when we tell stories, it's a way for people to understand the work that Raksha does locally here and bring to life the reality of what we see on a day-to-day basis. So I'm so grateful for our local and not so local South Asian authors who are really telling important stories that are not often told and bringing truth to light. So thank you for all that you do. And as always, so grateful to partner with Karis, so grateful to partner with amazing individuals that I love and hold dear in my heart. So thank you. And I'm gonna let y'all take it away because y'all's stories are the important ones we got to talk about. Thank you, Kieran, for hosting this.
Well, first of all, thank you, Aparna, Raksha, and thank you at ER for Karis for giving us this space, this very cherished and wonderful space in Atlanta. I'm joined by the extremely talented and wondrous Vina Rao and Farzana Doctor. These are 2 authors whom I know for very different reasons. Veena is a family friend, and we've known each other for several years, actually, independent of being writers. We just know each other being part of the Karnataka community of Atlanta. But I believe that I decided to review one of her books for a journal, and then I also ended up reviewing one of Farzana's books, who I also connected to digitally. And when I did that, I thought these are just two really special books. These are two really interesting books. They're both almost page turners, like you start them, and with just a few days, I gobbled them both up, and they were both really interesting reads. And beyond like the aspects that we're going to talk about today, just as books, they're just fascinating and fun reads. And I think it's something telling that a book, even as a critic, you're thinking, okay, how is the book working in terms of structure, plot, whatever. But I actually was also just enjoying them and just wanting to just go through them as quickly as possible without any thought critically. So I think that's a good sign that some of the people here also need to go out of their way and learn more about these writers, because they really are just fascinating storytellers. And more importantly, for the context of this session, I felt like there was a lot thematically that overlapped and could have been kind of played with in regards to those two books. So I thought it'd be really interesting to have them in conversation. So I reached out to both of them. I put them in touch, and I was like, we have to do something because I've read both of your books and I really see a lot of overlap. So I want to kind of have the chance to talk about that. So thank you too for coming and being willing to talk about your books and in conversation with each other. So
Thank you, Kieran.
Before we start that part where I try to like tease what I think are like the similarities or differences between these two books, I think it'll be useful for some of you who might not know enough about the books yet to hear these two authors read from their books. So I'd like to ask Farzana now to read a lovely passage from her novel Seven. So please take it away, Farzana.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who's here today, and to Karis Books and to Raksha. And Kieran and Veena really took the lead on creating this event, and so thank you to you both. I've had a chance to read both of your works, and I'm a fan of you both. So I'm going to be reading from Seven, and this is a book about a 40-year-old woman who goes to India on a marriage-saving trip with her husband and 7-year-old daughter, Z. And she thinks that she's going to be spending her time doing research about a revered ancestor and homeschooling her kid. And what ends up happening is much more than that, because the novel takes place in 2016, where in the Dawoodi Bohra community, there's an uprush of energy around looking at an issue called Khatna, which is a form of gender-based violence, female genital cutting that happens in the community. So she gets embroiled in some of the political issues that are coming up in the community in 2016. So I'll just start by reading from the first page of the book. And this is a jump ahead chapter. It's April 2016, and it takes place in Mumbai. I take a cautious sip. Tasneem Masi pours half her cup into her saucer and sucks the tea down in one long, loud slurp. She pulls up her orna, which slid from her oiled hair to her shoulders, tucking the gauzy fabric around an ear to keep it in place. It is going to happen today, this afternoon. Masi's life is going to change irrevocably. Will she think her favorite niece has turned traitor? I cannot stop this moving train. What good will it do to announce the crash? After all, Masi can't get off at the next stop. Instead, I sit at the edge of my beloved aunt's couch, scalding tea burning my tongue. Masi appraises my full cup, raises her right eyebrow. I shake my head. Still too hot. You should do it like me. Her lips upturn into a mischievous smile as she empties the rest of her tea into her saucer, and a wisp of cardamom steam rises in front of her face. With a slight tremor, she lifts the saucer to her lips. See, she says proudly, as though chai drinking is a competition. She doesn't spill a single drop. All right. I tip my teacup to my saucer, and chai dribbles onto her glass-topped coffee table. I pat the spill with a tissue. Sorry. Anything wrong, Sharifa? You are quiet today. I meet her gaze. Her eyes are a chestnut brown and shinier than they used to be. These are my eyes too, and the eyes of my mother, my cousin sisters, and our daughters. Masi, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. There's something I need to tell you. The doorbell tangs, and the coward I am relieved. I inhale courage and wishfully think that I can be loyal to Masi and my mother, my cousin's sisters, and our daughters all at the same time. Later, when I share my day with my husband, Murtaza, he will ask me, and what about you? What's being loyal to you? I will not know the answer, won't even be able to make sense of the question. Masi rises, but I gesture for her to stay seated. Instead, I stand to unlatch the door. And I'll just read one second excerpt. And this is from the point of view of Abdulali, who is the great-great-grandfather who Sharifa ends up researching. And this excerpt is from January 1866, South Bombay. 11-year-old Abdulali huddled under the yellow glow of a street lamp, his index finger pacing his labored reading. The lion lives in the jungle, he whispered. His roar is loud. An elderly fruit seller trudged by with an empty wooden cart pulled by a weary bullock. Just in time, Abdulali wrapped his legs around the post to avoid a heavy hoof, landing on his toe. A fly, one of the bullock's many-winged passengers, hopped onto his hand and then onto the Hindi primary reader he had borrowed from Sunil, the 9-year-old boy of the family for whom he worked. He told his mother it was a gift. Did she believe the lie? Thinking of her, it seemed, could summon her. He looked up and saw her face framed in the window of the third-floor room they shared with another widow and her 3 young children. She fanned herself with her orna. Despite the evening's cool, the day's heat lingered in the room. He waved to her and pleaded, 5 more minutes, Mummy? She nodded, her lips a straight line. But he knew she was proud of him, knew that they had left the village for a better life. And for now, their better life was just this one nicked book about a lion in a jungle that he struggled, word by word, to understand. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Farzana. I think that particularly in the first section, that part where you talk about culture fealty, this feeling that sometimes we have to do things not for our sake, but for the sake of our ancestors. I think that's something really interesting, and maybe it's worth talking about a little later. But for now, I would like to ask Veena to step in and tell us or give us a section of her book. Please read.
That was wonderful, Farzana, and I loved your book 7.
Thank you. Thank you. I loved Purple Lotus.
I'm glad. So thank you, Kiran, and thank you, ER and Raksha, for this opportunity. So I'll be reading a passage from my book, Purple Lotus, and you also see it at the back. So yeah, Purple Lotus is the story of Tara, an Indian immigrant woman in the American South who is trapped in an emotionally and later physically abusive marriage, but she feels powerless in the face of pressure from her patriarchal family to make peace with her destiny. So the story follows Tara as she gradually builds the courage to break free, to learn to, gently rebuild her life, and even to find lasting happiness. So I'll be reading the essay that Tara writes for her hometown newspaper, where she is essentially confronting her patriarchal community. And it pretty much summarizes her journey from victim to survivor to changemaker. My first act of self-determination at the age of 36 made me a pariah. My crime? I walked out of an abusive, loveless marriage. Up until that point, I was only fodder for gossip. First, because I was not good enough, pretty enough, smart enough, outgoing enough to win a husband in an arranged marriage. And next, because the man who married me abandoned me for 3 years. No reasons were asked of him. It was my fault. I hadn't tried hard enough to be worthy of him. Ours is a culture where a man's word is the word. So when my ex had a change of heart and sent for me, my family only felt relief. I was packed off to the US, no questions asked. I felt relief too, to escape the torment that our society reserves for an abandoned wife. When I landed in America, the land of dreams, I already felt like a zero, my sense of self-worth crushed by my own people. It got worse. I was ignored, neglected, denied a wife's place, and yet the onus was on me to try harder to make the marriage work. My ex told me the marriage was a mistake. I begged him not to send me back. If I had returned, they would have branded me an even bigger failure. It escalated to emotional and physical violence, and he was still not answerable to anyone. When he threw me out, I summoned the courage to move on, but my ex had a change of heart and was ready to accept me back. I was told I had no choice but to go back. Good wives make peace with their circumstances. They don't fight their destiny. They don't put their own happiness before their family's reputation, I was told. Forcing people to get back together does not magically breed love. My ex and I both knew that. There was nothing to bind us together, not love, not affection, not shared interests, not shared dreams. Then something magical happened to me. One day, 5 years into a meaningless, miserable marriage, I realized that I deserve better. When I walked out into the unknown, strangely, I wasn't dying. My spirit was only then taking rebirth. My life in the months that followed was filled with the love and kindness of friends, which was driven by my own courage. I was finally a person with dreams, desires, and many reasons to live. I had finally taken control of my life. Sadly, this basic right is denied to many of us. To the modern day keepers of our traditions, I ask, why is it always the woman who is instructed to try harder to win over her husband, to adjust, to stay silent, to make peace with the injustices she faces? When things go wrong, why can't she turn to her family? If she finally decides to stand up for herself, why does her family not stand with her? Why is the victim victimized even further? Why are no questions asked of the perpetrator? A woman who steps out of line blackens her family honor. She is branded an outcast. There is thrill in dragging a woman's name through the muck by repeating her story to all and sundry. My ex, meanwhile, lives without stigma. I know I will be maligned for one more reason when this essay is published: airing dirty laundry in public. A man can do it with no fear of social censure, safe in the knowledge that even his wife's own family would disown her. I fear censure, for it is but a form of rejection. I have feared rejection all my life, and yet I had to tell my version of my story. For it's not my story alone, it's the story of countless other women like me. Not all monsters are egregious. Some stay hidden in plain sight. They wear a normal mask. They don't set you on fire, but they crush your spirit slowly until you die every day. The monster is not the perpetrator alone. The ones who breed him, the ones who victimize the victim, the relatives and neighbors and town people who judge unfairly, they are the monsters too. The monster is the anachronistic mindset that needs to change. I was expected to exist for society. I chose to live, to love. I take heart in the knowledge that the monsters around me do not sully me, because the names they have for me are not the names I give myself. Thank you.
Beautiful. Very well done, Veena.
Thank you.
Very beautiful piece. And it also, like what Farzana read, it kind of gets us prepared to talk a little bit about community in a certain way. And the way community often makes us, traps us into certain lives and certain ways that we have to live. Before we go there, I would like to talk a little bit more about your characters, which I think would be good because not everyone here has read both of your books, and I think it'd be good just to give a little bit more insight or information about that. Like, if you had to describe briefly in succinct, terms, like your main character and who this person is and how you came to write this person, would you be able to? Maybe we can ask Farzana to start first and tell us a little bit about Sharifa and how she came to the perspective of creating this person.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I was just thinking that our protagonists would be good friends, probably.
Yes.
So how my protagonist Sharifa came about was in kind of one of the most delightful ways you can have characters come as a writer, and doesn't always come this way. But at the time that I started writing Seven, I was doing a lot of writing with pen and paper because I was fairly busy. I was promoting my third novel. I was very involved in some activism against Khatna. And I just found myself like not really wanting to write, but these fully formed fictional scenes were just sort of coming out onto the page, and I let it happen. And after about 20 of those scenes were in my notebook, I transferred them to the computer, and I realized that I was working on a novel. So she just sort of came. And, I did a lot of revision after that to make her make sense to a reader. But so she's a character who is a bit clueless about what's happening in her community. And some of that I built in after the fact because I wanted to introduce readers to two things that they probably didn't have much awareness of. One is the Dowdy Bora community, which is a very insular, small, secretive in some ways community. And then I also wanted to be able to write in a very nuanced way what is Khatna, what is female genital cutting in our community. And this is an issue that only came into public discourse around 2015 in the community. People were, talking about it in very hushed ways, but it's such a taboo, silenced issue that many people didn't even know it was happening in India and in the diaspora until it came out in the media in 2015. So I needed this character to be someone who was unearthing a lot of things in a very slow way so that the reader could move along with her journey. And she's also trying to understand her own family's history that comes through in her research about the great-great-grandfather. And so I have her piecing together that history while also showing what is really going on in his world, the things she can't find out herself. So that's a little bit about her. She grew up in the US and was in India until age 4. And she's somebody who kind of balances the two worlds and the two her identities in sometimes precarious ways.
Yeah, that was something I could really relate to as someone of a similar position as Sharifa, because the way that you described her biculturalism, I thought was much more like fresh compared to a lot of ways that other migrant narratives are created. It's more like she really doesn't care about having to justify herself or having to and she even likes living in India. She doesn't take it kind of like, oh, I have to be one thing or the other. I just am, and that's just what it is kind of thing. So I really appreciated that. Going back to the theme, I guess, Veena, would you like to talk a little bit about your character, who your character is, and how this person came to existence?
Yes, so like my protagonist Tara, I also come from a patriarchal culture, and I have experienced firsthand how patriarchy can affect interpersonal relationships and even just the way you view yourself. And so it was very important for me to write about a woman who is conditioned to believe she is weak, who feels like she has little control over her life. She's fearful, vulnerable. Because I was this woman at some point. So my own journey in this country in the past 2 decades as an immigrant, especially here in Atlanta, has been all about, learning to confront my fears and to believe in myself. And so I wanted to explore this in my novel. And I also wanted to explore what abuse would do to a woman who already has a weak sense of self, who is already struggling with deep-rooted fears of abandonment. How would she find the courage to break free, to gently rebuild her life, and to find lasting happiness? So that's what I wanted to explore, and that's how Purple Lotus came into being.
Yes. So, what are the certain sorts of trauma, or not trauma, trauma, domestic trauma that you all want to explore specifically in these communities? And how did you use fiction to undertake that task? Veena, since you're nodding, can you go ahead and tell us about that?
Yeah, see, I'm a journalist. I have a day job as a journalist, and I see incidents of domestic violence all the time. I've seen it growing up in Mangalore, in small town Mangalore in India. So I think domestic violence is, it transcends race or culture. It happens everywhere, right? You see it happening here also. But there are some cultural distinctions that determine how much freedom a woman has to change her circumstance. In patriarchal communities such as the one I come from, the burden is always on the woman to try harder. It's always the woman who is blamed if things don't work out. And this burden on the woman to just, make peace with her destiny. And so my protagonist, Tara, she is trapped in an abusive marriage, but she feels powerless in the face of pressure to just make peace, to stay put. So when she does find the courage to walk out with the help of American strangers, she is forced by her family to return. So what will people say? What about her family honor? What is life without a husband? And these are, questions that are used to keep a victim in her place and stops her from seeking help, from trying to change her circumstance. And this is something I wanted to bring forth in my novel.
What about you, Farzana?
Yeah, so I was starting to become involved in anti-FGM activism around the time that I was starting to write the novel, and I was also grappling with my own issues, my own trauma around being a victim of the practice as well. And so I wanted to find a way to fold in this very difficult issue into a good story. And so I did my best to put my author hat on first and really work on pacing and setting and characters and plot and all of that, because I think it's really possible for us to fold difficult issues into something that is a page turner. And so just a little bit about this issue. I wanted to explore it specifically from the perspective of the Dawoodi Bohra community, and look at the nuances. So I have, characters who believe it's a good and normal thing to do. I have characters who are on the opposite end of that, and then Sharifa, who is the clueless kind of one in the middle. But this is a global issue as well. It affects at least 92 countries and counting. We're sort of having a Me Too movement around FGM right now as more and more survivors come forward to talk about it and talk about how, it transcends religion and culture and race. Just for the Americans in the audience, this is a practice that was covered by health insurance plans until the 70s for white Christian women were being subjected to it. So it was really important for me to talk about all of the subtleties, all the nuances of this very global issue, but from the perspective of, a few women's stories.
Yes. And I think that it succeeded partly because what Sharifa can do, being that person in the middle, is kind of give insight to all the different aspects of that debate, and not like in a particularly like contrived way. Like no one feels like a mouthpiece in your book. They really just feel like they're asking questions and trying to figure out like what's best for them. I think also what's interesting is that both of your books are populated by a lot of secondary characters and interconnectional. That's not the word I'm looking for, but there's a relation to which you two or your characters rather are relating to others in regards to their trauma. First, I want to take that in regards to their partner, a significant other. So Farzana, how do you feel that a relationship or relationship management played a role in Sharifa's journey? And if you could tell us more about that as well. And how that affects abuse and cycles of abuse.
So that relationship, the marriage, plays a very big role in this book. So Sharifa is married to Murtaza, who is from her community, but somebody who doesn't believe in the religion very much and really pushes away the religion. He, in some of the ways that Sharifa is a bit closed off and avoidant in her style of being. I'm a psychotherapist in the afternoon, so I use attachment attachment styles in my characters quite a bit. So she's more avoidant, and he's a bit anxious. And there's also been some difficulty in their marriage in the backstory. So a few years earlier, Sharifa had an emotional affair, which has left quite a bit of insecurity in the marriage. But at the same time, he's a forward-thinking, pro-feminist kind of dude, and so he does push and prod her to go a little bit further in her thinking about these issues and also in her healing. So that was quite intentional to have him be somebody who would bug her to go a little bit further.
What about sorry, Farzana,
continue. The other piece is because sexuality is kind of an important area for this novel because of the way that Khatna impacts sexuality. He's also kind of a driver in terms of the sexuality in the book, and hopefully that came across well. Anyway,
yeah, that's another thing to talk about. There's a lot of, I don't want to spoil it too much either, but I think it's interesting the way that you use certain alternative sexuality practices, are not really necessarily alternative, but like the way that those certain things are used to heal Sharifa, give her clues into what's really bugging her, I thought was really smart, actually. And it helped to escalate tension a lot in the book as well. Anyways, so Veena, how about you? How does the abuse or the traumas that Tara has dealt with in the way that she interacts with her life partners?
Yeah, so Tara has deep-rooted fears of abandonment. And even though she's steadily gaining strength through the book, this is one fear that remains tightly coiled inside her. So in the book, she is eventually reunited with her childhood crush, Cyrus, who comes back into her life. But unlike Sharifa's husband, Murtaza, he's loving, he's kind, attentive. But her own fears and insecurities come in the way of the relationship. She's quick to feel jealous. She's quick to doubt his love for her. She's quick to imagine that he's going to leave her. And there's a reason why Tara is the way she is. When she was little, her parents had left her behind with her aging grandparents and an uncle, but they took her baby brother with them to make a new life for the family in Dubai. So this uncle, he becomes her father figure. He's loving, he's kind, he's gentle, but then he falls victim to the voices in his head. He's a schizophrenic, and and he turns on Tara during those episodes, and she has no choice but to relegate herself to her room upstairs, and books become her only companions as she's growing up. And I had to imagine what this would do to a child's psyche. So anyway, Tara, the adult Tara, she moves back from Atlanta to the center of her problems, which is Mangalore, her grandparents' home in Mangalore. And it is then that she realizes that all the major crises in her life are interconnected, and her healing lies in confronting this big major fear that she has of being abandoned. It also saving her relationship with Cyrus also depends on confronting and healing from her past.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that is also an interesting angle to that uncle dimension that I myself have not thought about as much. So it
was very vivid. It was very vivid. Like, it was very clear how her issues with Cyrus really go back to the hauntings of that old trauma. I thought that was beautiful.
And the uncle's character is based on my own uncle, who was also schizophrenic, and I have seen how it has affected not only his immediate family but all of us, the extended family. And there was such a deep sense of shame talking about it. We never talked about it outside, and so that's something I wanted to present in the book.
This is maybe an odd like an out of nowhere question, so I apologize for it. But at the same time, I think it's an important one to bring up: the topic of shame, the topic of community. I think the fact that things happen to us, that when we're different in a certain way, like we have to deal with it, but then the society shames us in certain ways and says, particularly South Asian societies rather, that no, you cannot talk about this. No, you're doing injustice to your family or culture, whatever. So just as something for advice for the people who are either in the audience or younger and trying to deal with that, like how do you confront that shame and how do you learn to speak despite it? Either of you two can start.
Yeah. I think it's through finding your allies, finding your community and your comrades, and then finding a way to express yourself in whatever way is appropriate for you. Just one of the things that I had to grapple with myself was my activism around FGM had been very much in the background before this novel was getting ready to come out. I sat on steering committees. I was the Twitter handler, but I was never in the spotlight talking about this issue, and not as a survivor. I just wasn't ready to do that. And I knew that as this novel was going to be coming out, that I would probably need to center myself a bit more in that narrative, because it would just make sense, right? You're being interviewed by media and you're doing events like this, and you need to be able to sort of explain a little bit about where these ideas came from. And what I really found was that by the second interview that I did around these issues, whatever shame that had been kind of lodged in my psyche had lifted. And I think that came from, doing psychotherapy, doing activism, having the comrades, and then expressing myself. And again, that's going to look very different for every individual. But I think that's the way you release it.
Yeah, for me personally, it has been a very long, difficult battle, dealing with shame. It's so internalized. That's the way I've grown up. And it's only when I, started to write Purple Lotus and started to promote Purple Lotus that I've become a little bolder and started to talk about it. So maybe baby steps, take baby steps.
Do you feel like there's a way that you can still, like there's some way to kind of redeem that society? There's a way that you can still build a relationship with that community, even if they don't fully accept your trauma. They're still learning how to accept your trauma, understand it. Is there a way to reconnect?
I doubt my community understands. So the only way I deal with it is let them say, I have to do what I think is right now. But I'm not expecting any support from my community.
The way that I feel the redemption of the community is by being involved with the feminists of the community. So, when I started becoming involved in the activism, one of the most profound realizations I had was I hadn't ever known a feminist activist from my community before that moment. Of course, I have family members who are feminists, but to actually meet change makers from my own community was what made me feel closer to my community. And of course, there are going to be many people who don't want to have the dirty laundry aired, using Vina's phrase from her reading. There's a lot of people who will be very angry about that. And yes, you just have to let them be and make sure you surround yourself with the right people.
That's very valuable advice. I mean, I just suddenly realized that even though I'm just a moderator, there's a way that I can also tie back to this community being an LGBT person. And I also have to deal with this trauma.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's something interesting that I just suddenly dinged on.
Yes.
Anyways,
you find the South Asian queer community, right, as a safer place to rest. Mm-hmm.
But there's still that desire, that hope that somehow it can still all come back together. But it might not. You might have to just accept that as part of fate.
Exactly. And it's okay. It's okay if they don't support you,
You have to learn to support yourself.
Yeah.
And that is everyone in this room. Yes. All right. So anyways, let's lighten up the conversation a little bit. I also want some people in the chat room to start throwing questions at us, please. Because we're already at 40 minutes and it feels like we've covered a lot, but we could cover even more. Let's do some fun questions. So crazy writing things, just fun things you do when you're writing that no one else probably needs to know about. Farzana, what are some quirky writing habits for you?
Sometimes when I'm feeling a little like low about my writing, I will just, it's bad for my posture and everything, but I take everything to my bed. I get all snuggled up and cuddled in bed, and I will do my writing from there with my laptop or pen and paper. I also have learned some techniques for kind of raising your mood and your vibration, because it's very common, I think, for people to approach, the blank page with a lot of like, overwhelm, right? So, I'll do, some gratitude statements. I'll light a candle. I'll do things. I'll use some energy psychology to raise my energy.
Perfect. What about you, Veena?
Well, I'm like a horse with blinkers when I'm writing. I have to go deep into my fictional world, and then so the rest of the world just fades away. I usually craft my scenes first during long walks or just sitting cross-legged on the carpet after a meditation session or long showers. And then of course, I come back and write. But what was I going to say? I blank out at times. Yeah, so that's the quirky part, I think. And, I also have a day job as a journalist. So, I don't like to take calls when I'm writing. Sometimes my advertisers have to remind me to send them the invoices. And I'm like, do I have to? So it's difficult to extricate myself from that world at times. But yeah, writing Purple Lotus took all of 10 years. And it has been a very messy, very long journey. Hopefully for my next book, it'll be much more clear. I'll have an outline.
And what is your next book, Veena? Could you tell us about it?
Well, all I can say at this point is it's based in small town, Georgia. It will have an immigrant female protagonist again. But it will talk about contemporary issues like racism, rise of nationalist sentiments, identity. Well, that's all I know for now.
I'll be interested.
And I'm hoping to start writing later this year.
Yes, I hope. I'll be curious to see if you're talking about only the rise of nationalism here or also in India, which is
both places.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw the news, but the OCI card, which some of us saw, was just recently redefined that OCIs are now foreigners, not.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you later, so that's something else that could be talked about a lot. It pissed me off a lot, frankly. But anyways, that's another thing I'll send a link later. Farzana, what's your next book about?
So I have two things. Hopefully that will be out soon. So for the last 10 years, I've been picking away at a poetry collection called "You Still Look the Same," and that's coming out in fall 2022. And while I was waiting for, Seven to get to the right hands, I started working on a YA novel that's inspired by one very weird year when I was 15. And it's searching for the right home right now. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good luck.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm also really hoping that Seven comes out in India. We're looking for, we're looking to sell the foreign rights for it.
Good.
And so send out a prayer for that too. When it gets its India publisher.
Yeah, contact me later about that, Farzana. I mean, you might know people as well, but I know people too. So
I'll contact you too, because I'm also looking for an Indian.
I'll have another group chat.
You two are literary angels, by the way. Like, you've been so helpful. That's so kind. Yeah.
I like to help people. I don't know. I mean, I think that particularly if I like their writing and I like them as a person, it's like, why not help my friends? I mean, it's a fucking tough world.
It is, and we have to amplify each other's voices. We have to help each other out. Mm-hmm.
And what are some interesting role models, both contemporary and from days past, that you all would like to talk about?
Writers?
Yes, writers. Yes.
Well, growing up, I was a big Agatha Christie fan. Yeah, I loved Poirot and I loved to beat him at his deduction game. And I'm still a fan of thrillers. I love thrillers, whodunits. I can watch anything that's in the thriller genre. I recently watched Behind Her Eyes on Netflix. I think it was brilliant. If you haven't, watch it. Watch it. I'm also very fond of period places, especially those set in the 19th century, early 20th century. But as a writer, I look up to other immigrant writers, Salman Rushdie, Jhumpa Lahiri, Kiran Desai, and there's so many others, Adichie. Because they motivated me to write. Khalid Hosseini, his two books, Night Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns, motivated me to write Purple Lotus. So I'm always grateful to him.
What about you?
What about you, Farzana?
Yeah, I read a lot, and I think every book that I read, whether it's a book I love or a book that I'm, meh about, is still a teacher for me about writing. So I have a hashtag that I use where I pose my willing dog with books, so people can look at that for a list. It's Maggie with books, just hashtag Maggie with books. But I would say one of my most inspirational kinds of writers is Zadie Smith. I found myself reading White Teeth around the time when I was just kind of thinking about, should I write more? And I love the way that she takes on really important kind of socio-political issues, but with lots of humor. Like there's a lot of funny mixed in, and that's something I try to do as well. So I aspire to be like Zadie Smith.
So we still have a little bit of time, but I'm asking for people to throw questions. Are there any people who have questions, or they just want to chime in quickly?
Please chime in.
Yeah, because a part of me feels like yes, please, double, triple.
Aparna has a question.
I put some in the question.
I don't see anything.
So ask the question.
There's another part of this. That's why I didn't understand how this works. Okay, now I see the question. Okay.
Kiran, you might want to invite
a few.
Yeah. So, okay, given our community's reluctance to go to therapy for our community to heal and counter shame, how do we change this dialogue? Okay, so basically it is about, we don't, as people from a South Asian background, we're told that therapy is not... anyways, it's not viable for a lot of us. So how can we start to confront that stigma and allow people to heal using therapy? I think Farzana, ironically, is a South Asian therapist, can answer that question fairly well.
Yeah, I really see this changing. Like there are so many South Asian therapists. I see them on social media, sharing information. So I think it's gradually changing, that people are losing the stigma around this, which is a good thing. And I think that has to do with, pop culture, the way that therapy is presented in pop culture and on social media. It's become much more accessible. So we're not there yet, but I think the more we talk about it's about breaking silence, right? Whenever we break silence about our traumas, about going to therapy, all of that, we start to change.
Yes, interesting. Oh, sorry, Veena, if you have something.
No, I have nothing to add to that. I agree with you, Anna, and I'm not a therapist.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this one, the next one of these questions, I think would be actually really good for Veena. It was from a pawn, and it asked aren't all of our cultures patriarchal? So me and Farzana, as people raised in the West, were probably more versed in Western culture in certain ways. Veena, coming between, say, growing up and spending most of your formation in India and then coming here, do you feel like there is a difference in the shape that patriarchy takes between, say, this part of the world and that part of the world?
Strangely, I think people who've moved here in the 80s and 90s, they hold on to their old beliefs, right? They hold on to their old beliefs. Because when I go back to India, I see that there's so much of America in India. And
that's what we talk about all the time.
Yes.
Talk about that, because the generation, the older generation is so much more strong.
Exactly. Yes. And that's something I see in my day job as a journalist. I work with the Indian American community here. They hold on to their old, outdated beliefs that you don't even, and so they're shocked when they go back to India and they see so much change there.
Yes, and they can't relate to that.
They can't relate to that. And I can't relate to that. Some of the things there. So There you go.
Sometimes I relate to actually India more now than the US because the LGBT movement and the certain ways that, the migration movement's there now at a place where someone like me can kind of more easily step in. So it's interesting as well. Yes. For youngsters, I mean. Do you have something to say about that, Farzana, or should we go to the next question?
Well, yeah, just I would want to emphasize that this is really global. Patriarchy is global, and we do have specific kinds of expressions or nuances in each culture, and because we are somewhat or completely embedded in the culture, it becomes a challenge. But it in terms of FGM, like that is really worldwide. It's really worldwide, and domestic violence is worldwide, right? So, yeah.
Yes. Aparna has something to say there. Kiran, do you see?
Yeah, she was saying like her mother has this. It's a thing that ties it back to India, that for people who migrate, not just Indians, anyone who migrates, like even this happens to me as someone who left the US and traveled a lot, like you get stuck in what you think that country was, say in the 90s or 2000s, and you come back and it's a completely different place. And so the values stay fixed there. So, yeah. And I think, yes, what you say, Farzana, is right. FGM is a global problem. All these things are global problems. And sometimes when we limit it to nationality, we just kind of create a funnel vision and we kind of like forget about, or we like to point fingers as well. We like to say, look at all the gender problems happening in India. But then what about the ones happening just next door to you, or in your entire family, So that's something we have to sometimes think about. Next question. It is, how do you find ways to talk about or create worlds and people deeper than just their trauma or their violence? How do you express that joy, that love, that more than what is that which has hurt us? Veena, do you want to try to take that? Or Farzana was nodding very positively, so maybe she can take it.
Maybe I'll start and then Veena can carry it on. I think we do that by writing story, right? We create stories, and we want our characters to be, have very full lives, right? So that means that there has to be room for silly, there has to be room for joy, there has to be room for fun in the writing. So, and what I said earlier about, you weave in the difficult issues in a way that can be digestible. I think that really helps. So, beyond FGM, 7 is a novel about a woman grappling with her marriage and her sexuality and herself as a parent and her relationships with her cousins and her relationship to India and all of that kind of stuff, right? So you make sure that the characters have very full lives.
Yes, and that's
right, yeah. And Purple Lotus deals with heavy themes like abuse and patriarchy and all of that, but it's not completely, the book is not completely heavy, like there are so many uplifting moments in Tara's life. And as a writer, you explore all of that, all the facets of life. So yeah, and like I said, I craft my scenes during long walks, and every emotion that every character feels, I have to feel it too. And I'm personally, I'm a very positive person. And I think that has, even though I'm dealing with heavy topics, the positive energy, I think has, somehow I have found a way to, talk about it.
So I think this will be our last question for the day, and it's a very suitable one because it's Women's History Month. Tomorrow is International Women's Day. So what is it that you feel like you learned from the women in your family, and how did they inspire your writing, and what kind of message do you want to give to women who are watching this? Veena, do you want to try to take that first?
I'm sorry, what was the question? What's the message for?
Yeah, since it's Women's Day, what are the things you learned from the women around you and how they shaped your writing or your understanding of yourself in regards to your writing? And then what is a message that you would like to give to the women who happen to be here?
Okay, my message is for women who are trapped in an abusive or difficult situation. There's always hope. There's hope regardless of how you might feel now, how you might feel about yourself now. Things are going to change, or even if they don't change, if you're not in a position to seek help, you always have control over your mind. So believe in yourself, believe that things will, change for the better, and nobody can change that for you. You have to do that yourself. And the second message is for women who are trapped. The pandemic has made things, I'm sure Aparna will agree that, violence and abuse, the rate of, the percentage of people who report violence has dropped, but the actual cases have increased, I believe. So I would say, believe in yourself. There's always hope to change your life. Things will get better. That's my message.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Farzana? What are you?
Yeah, I liked what you said. Maybe I'll address the first part of the question, which is the family. So I've been involved with a group called We Speak Out. WeSpeakOut.org is how people can find us. And what we're trying to do is work within the community to provide education about the harms of this social norm, this outdated practice, so that, because most people haven't even thought about it. Most people, aren't talking about it. And so what I would say is talk about it. If you are someone who has experienced this form of gender-based violence, find your comrades and start talking about it. I think that there's a lot of room for hope when we do this. So I want to talk about my nanny, who I dedicated the book to. She is, I think, 96 now. And she would have been somebody who, would have just believed all the myths that we're taught around Khatna, and, that it's harmless and all of that. But, she has been listening. Myself and one of my aunts have been involved in activism around this issue, and my nanny has been listening, and she agreed to be part of 2 social media campaigns in terms of having her image used. And I was very proud of her for doing that, right? Like I wouldn't have expected that, somebody who isn't an activist would be willing to have her image used in our social media campaigns. So what I would say is, like, know that sometimes there are these hidden allies in our families, and that change is possible even within our families.
Yeah, so you both have given very wonderful advice, and I think that learning to keep that hope that we can somehow still remain part of our community despite deciding to be outsiders or different is a very important message. We don't have to be alone. We have each other as well, and we're all there for each other. We're all connected, and we're all one. I think you have some things to say as well before we start wrapping up. Is that it? From Keras, yes.
Yes. I just want to welcome everyone to check out all of your books. So I'm going to drop these links once more in the chat. So the first is a link to 7, and you can buy actually all of Farzana's books from us. So if you go there, then you'll be able to hop, skip, and jump to all of them. And this is a link for Purple Lotus. And then I'll be dropping the links to Kieran's books as well in just a moment. I want to let you know that we have several exciting events coming up that Raksha is helping us co-sponsor. So next Saturday, we are celebrating the children's book, Lakshmi's Mooch, which is by Shelley Anand. So I'm going to drop that in the chat as well. That is a really sweet book in celebration of positive body image for children and teaching. It's a story of a little girl who is embarrassed about her facial hair and then comes to celebrate herself. So that's a really fun and special book that we're really glad to be celebrating during Women's History Month. And then we will also be celebrating, I see that Anjali is on the line and has been joining us today. And Anjali's book of essays is out in mid-April, and we will be celebrating that, Southbound. So I'm going to drop the link to that as well. And we would love for folks to join us to celebrate. Anjali has 2 books coming out back to back, one in April and one in May, but we will be hosting the celebration conversation for Southbound. So we're thrilled for that as well. So just lots of good things coming up. And if you are new to Keras or looking for feminist community, one of the great benefits of this time is that we get to connect with people around the world and really be an international community and learn from one another. So we're doing events almost every night virtually, and we've learned so much from this that we plan to continue having virtual events once we're able to be physically together again. So I hope that if you enjoyed today, you will join us, by following our events and all kinds of other ways of staying connected. We're on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I'm hoping that y'all can also remind people where they can find you online as well. Oh yes, good. Farzana's already starting. Excellent. Drop your preferred. Yes, excellent. Because we want people to be able to follow along with your work.
Nice.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much for having us, ER. Thank you so much, Raksha. Thank you, Farzana and Veena, for being willing to talk about your work and yourselves. And I look forward to our next events and your next event as well.
And thank you, Kieran, for being such a great moderator. Go check out Kieran's books too.
Yes.
We of the Forsaken World.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much to you all. I hope you stay safe and well. And
thank
I
you
look
so
forward
much,
to celebrating future books.
And Raksha. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.